So some of the things that Venerable have been mentioning at least a couple of times during this EML retreat is the issue of identities. And so we come to monastic life with a number of identities, some of which we are aware of and some of which we may not be aware of. So I've been doing some exploration about my different identities and trying to figure out how to best let go of some of them as it's become clear to me that these identities are really a stumbling block on the path. So I checked to see what's the definition of identity in the dictionary. And so it says identity is who someone is, the qualities and beliefs, etc., that makes a person or a group different from another. And that's, I think, the nature of why identities become such a stumbling block, barrier on the path, is because of the word different. As Venerable mentioned, as she's mentioned several times, she spent a lot of time of her monastic life trying to figure out how she was not different. And I think that's part of our work as monastics, is to figure out how we're not different. And so in doing that, we have to start teasing out these identities and then letting them go. And the identities go with us wherever we are, whether we know it or not, whether we see them or not. So they're sort of embedded in our mind, and we have to exert some effort in sort of bringing them to light. But we've grown convinced, and through our life we've grown convinced that these identities are actually helpful. I mean, and if we look back, we can see when maybe some of these identities have been helpful. When we had the identity of being a good student, we were a good student. We had good grades, made our life easier. We didn't have to be scolded by our parents. We might have had the identity of being a conscientious, efficient worker, which also helped us. We didn't get called into the boss's office as often, right? We got increasing salaries. We had some respect from our colleagues. So all these identities, we feel like they help us. This is something that I can be proud of to have, you know. So it's hard for us to see what are the disadvantages, and this is where the effort comes. We have to kind of look at them from a new point of view with the Dharma lens, and then see, are they really as beneficial as I think they are? And so, because if we don't have the thought that there are disadvantages to these identities, we'll never have that motivation. We never have the drive, the impulse, the desire to give them up, you know. And so it becomes then important part of our monastic life, I think, to really look at what are the disadvantages. And these are some of the things that I've been working on, is looking at some of my identities and figure out what are the disadvantages. And I put together a list of what I thought would be disadvantages. You might come up with others. I'm not saying this is exhaustive, but for example, they're very limiting. As much as we think that they're helpful, these identities, these ideas of who we are, actually limit our potential because we don't think we can go beyond them. It's like a stop marker. Here is my boundary, you know? Particularly, for example, for me, if I were to be limited by my identity as a Hispanic woman immigrant and what is expected in society for that kind of a label, then I would not have perhaps achieved other things. I would not have looked beyond that to see what other things I can do. I would not be able to relate to other groups of people because they're different from me, and so I would feel very encapsulated. So these are the limiting aspects. But also in relationship to those identities, we generate attachment and aversion. We generate attachment to groups and people that we think are similar to us, and then aversion to those that we see as different, as other. No? And it's harder for us then to try and figure out. The Buddha said, really, we are all similar and equal in wanting happiness and wanting to avoid suffering. But if we are busy trying to determine this is my group and here is where I belong, then that idea is not something that comes to mind. We're not able to see it. It also works against that in that it solidifies our idea of self. This is who I am, and it's very solid. And I cannot step away from that, because the moment I try to step away from that, my group is going to point out at me and say, look at you. We're now going to um, not accept you in our group because you're stepping out of the boundaries. But also with that idea of self, then how can I transform? If it's very solid, if this is who I am, then I'm not giving myself the chance ever to try and be something different. And the whole path is about transforming. It's also a barrier to equanimity, right? Because we cannot see people as the same. And I think very importantly, it's a threat to ethical conduct. Because if we have this notion that maybe I'm a terrorist, maybe I'm a thief, maybe I'm a gang member, these are all labels that we can put on ourselves, and there goes our ethical conduct. Or maybe I'm so ingrained with this group, they may not necessarily be terrorists, but I'm so ingrained with this group, they decide to go out and get plastered one evening, and I feel because I belong to that group, I have to go and plaster myself too with drinking and drugging. So these disadvantages are real, and I think the more that we can uh, work them through in our minds, the more that we'll start to build some space between these different identities, and it would be helpful to kind of look at each identity and then run it through these disadvantages so that we can see how specifically each one of them applies to the specific identity that we're working on. What I have found, though, in doing this is there's a lot of fear. A lot of fear comes up because if I give up these identities, then who am I? What am I? Who do I connect with? Where do I belong? Right? So I find that looking at the disadvantages alone is not, it doesn't get me out of the way. I was thinking that that's maybe the stick to get myself going. But I need a carrot. I need a carrot because I need to know where I'm going to land. If I let go of my little rope of my identities and all I look at is, oh, there is a big hole there and I don't know where I'm going, I'm not going to be willing to give that up. I don't care how much you tell me there are disadvantages to it. I'm not going to let go. So I need to know that I'm going to land in a nice, wonderful, loving place, right? So that I can just then like, okay, good. There's a soft landing, soft landing. And that's where the benefits come in. So I have to say, oh, good, this is the carrot. And then I can put some joyous effort. Why? Because if I let go of this, there's going to be growth. I can grow compassion. I can really connect with people. It supports my wisdom, right? It supports my ethical conduct. It's easier to generate the path. I'm looking all the way to Buddhahood. So then it's like, okay, good. The fear, I can move that out and then focus on the benefits. So I think these two things go hand in hand. If I need more motivation, I look at the disadvantages. If I need more oomph, I look at that. But if I need more, if I need to overcome my fear, then I look at the benefits. Another thing that's important about looking at the disadvantages is that it's not, I'm trying to get rid of these identities not because my teacher says that I have to, not because the Buddha says that I have to, not because the book says that I have to, but rather because I've understood that they're not serving me. And so looking at those disadvantages takes the idea from, being imposed upon me from the outside to actually being generated inward. And that makes a big difference. Um, and it's important also to arrive at the right conclusion for me anyway. So when I'm looking at the disadvantages, my conclusion there is identities are a burden. They are a stumbling block in my path. I need to let them go. But if I'm looking at the benefits from the benefit side, then my conclusion there would be how wonderful it is, how wonderful that I can let go of these identities. It's not a burden. It's not a lot of work. It's just something that's going to help me go to a very, very nice place. And then I feel that added energy and desire to move towards that. So anyway, that's my exploration of identities.